she'll listen closely. When darkness wraps the world and dreams begin to stir, you've arrived at the right place. Welcome to Between Dreams and Shadows, the sanctuary of stories that live between sleep and the unknown. Here, every tale is more than a story. It's a portal to hidden worlds, forgotten secrets, whispers from beyond, and shadows that speak as your eyes begin to close. If you're drawn to mysteries, haunting legends, and stories that send shivers down your spine, this channel is your new nighttime ritual. Before we begin, I invite you to become part of this growing nightbound community. Subscribe now, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale. New stories drop regularly, always under the veil of night. Like this video if you enjoy that chill before sleep. It helps this channel grow and lets me bring you deeper, darker stories. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a strange dream or felt something watching in the dark? Your experience might inspire the next tale now. Take a deep breath. Turn off the lights. Leave the world behind and get ready to drift. Between dreams and shadows. Setting the atmosphere the wind had stilled hours ago, leaving the night so quiet it felt almost suspended. Beyond the open window, the forest loomed motionless and watching. Tall silhouettes of trees stood like ancient sentinels under the pale, bruised moonlight, their branches, stripped and skeletal, pressed softly against the glass whenever the occasional breeze stirred. As if tapping politely to be let in, Elaine sat on the edge of her bed, one hand curled tightly around a ceramic mug of herbal tea, gone cold. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 2:41 a.m. in soft red. She had moved into the cabin only 2 weeks ago, a quiet place in the hills inherited from an aunt she barely remembered. It was supposed to be a retreat, a refuge from the overstimulation of her city life. No emails, no traffic, no noise, just silence. But the silence had begun to feel wrong, at first. She dismissed the sensation as the psychological residue of modern life, her brain inventing stimulation where none existed. But now, every time she sat in the living room reading, or cooked in the tiny kitchen, with the old hanging pots rattling slightly above, or lay under the heavy woolen blanket trying to sleep, she felt it, a pressure. Not exactly watching, not exactly listening, just ... there. Always in the corner of her awareness, just beyond what her eyes could confirm. The old house creaked in its own rhythm, the wooden floorboards expanding and contracting in the cool night air. She told herself it was normal. But sometimes the creaks came not from the floors, but from the walls or from inside the old pantry in the hallway. Elaine had found herself whispering aloud once. In a moment of irrational tension, "Is anyone there?" she had murmured while brushing her teeth, her own voice barely audible over the sound of running water. She hadn't expected an answer. Of course not. But that night, as she settled into bed, she had heard something. Sound like a whisper, not from the house, but from within her pillow. So faint, so brief, she couldn't be sure she hadn't dreamed it now. Sitting in the eerie calm of early morning, Elaine stared into the shadows of the hallway leading to the kitchen. She'd left the hallway light on, a small defiance against the consuming dark, but it flickered slightly now. Despite being a new LED bulb, her gaze drifted to the edge of the doorway, where light met darkness with surgical precision, and for a moment, she thought she saw the shadow ripple as if it breathed. Elaine set down her mug and leaned forward, her whisper barely audible. "Hello." The air in the room shifted barely. A cool breath slid across the back of her neck. Something, somewhere, was listening. The first signs of disturbance the next morning came quietly, as if reluctant to chase the night away. A low mist hung over the forest outside, clinging to the trees like a veil. Elaine awoke groggy and unsettled. Her dreams had been fragmented in strange disjointed scenes of empty rooms and muffled voices, as if her subconscious was trying to retell something she didn't want to remember. She padded across the cold wooden floor in thick socks, pulling on a cardigan before making her way to the kitchen. The hallway was dim despite the daylight. The bulb she'd left on all night was off now. Odd, she thought Tit wasn't on a timer. She flicked the switch. Nothing. Frowning, Elaine tried the other hallway light. It lit immediately, so why just that one bulb? Later, as she stood by the kitchen counter, pouring hot water over coffee grounds, she heard it again. Not a voice, not exactly, but something. A faint shift in the acoustics, like someone adjusting their weight across the house. But she was alone. She hadn't even opened the windows yet. She turned slowly, every muscle alert beneath her calm posture. The house remained still. No movement, no sound. But something on the counter caught her attention. Her grandmother's ceramic salt jar. It had moved. She had placed it at the far end of the counter the night before, tucked behind the spice rack. Now, it sat square in the middle, perfectly centered, as though someone had wanted to draw her attention to it. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. It was warm to the touch. That evening, she made sure to lock every door, double-check every latch, and keep every light on. She even placed a small notebook on the hallway floor just inside the threshold, see if it moved during the night. It felt absurd, childish, but something inside her needed to know. The hours passed slowly. The forest outside was too still, too quiet. Even the owls that had hooted their melancholy songs earlier in the week were silent tonight. At 2:17 a.m., the light flickered again. Elaine was in bed, barely blinking, heart hammering with a steady thump. She listened, deep, concentrated listening, where every sound, no matter how small, became a thunderclap of possibility. And then, the notebook. A tiny sound, barely audible, the shuffle of paper against wood. She sprang from bed and dashed into the hallway. The notebook was open. A single word had been scribbled on the blank page in shaky, gray pencil. Again, Elaine stared, the breath caught in her throat. She hadn't touched the notebook since placing it down. No one else had keys to the house. She slowly reached down and touched the pencil lying nearby. It was still warm. She didn't sleep again that night. Something was no longer content with hiding in the corners. It was becoming bolder. The sound. That shouldn't exist. Elaine didn't leave the house that day. She thought about it. She even packed a small bag and placed it near the door just in case. But something about the act of opening the front door felt wrong. Like stepping outside would break a boundary, letting whatever was inside know she was afraid, and that fear might be an invitation. Instead, she stayed. She watched. She listened. The house was unnaturally still, not silent still, as if every object was holding its breath. At 3 p.m., a sound began, barely perceptible at first, like the faintest hum beneath everything else. It wasn't mechanical. It didn't come from the walls or the appliances. It wasn't something she could locate. It was everywhere and nowhere. A low, droning murmur, just under the threshold of awareness. She pressed her hands to her ears. It didn't stop. The hum lingered well into the evening. Occasionally, it shifted, modulating, like a far-off engine, or the reverberation of a whispered chant. Then, as night folded over the hills and shadows pressed once again against the window panes, the hum vanished, and the whispers began. Elaine sat on the floor of her bedroom, every light on, candles flickering in a half-circle around her. The room smelled of lavender and burnt wax. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned on her voice recorder and placed it on the nightstand. She needed proof. The whispering started at 1:09 a.m. at first. It was so soft she thought it was just wind in the trees, but then it resolved. Words, though not clear, foreign, fragmented. Some sounded almost like names. Others were wet, clicking sounds, like someone speaking through water. Elaine closed her eyes and whispered again. "Hello." Silence, then reply. It was unmistakable, a breathy murmur that came not from the room, but from inside the recorder. Before she even picked it up, She played back the audio immediately. Click, static, and then her own voice. Hello, followed by a pause, then a whisper, raspy and gurgling. I see you. Elaine dropped the recorder, her breath caught in her throat. She staggered back from the nightstand, staring at the device as if it might lunge toward her. The whisper hadn't come from her. It hadn't echoed through the room. It had only existed in the recording. There was no logical explanation, no trick of the mind, no power surge or faulty input. It was there, etched into the digital track, and worse, she recognized something in the voice. It sounded like her, but older, slower, as if spoken from a place buried far beneath this world. Later that night, as she lay wide-eyed in bed, too paralyzed to move, she heard it again, closer now. A whisper, not in her mind, not on tape, but from inside the pillow. Again, the presence without a face. Elaine didn't speak at all. The next morning, she moved quietly through the house, unplugging the voice recorder, hiding it in a drawer she never used. It felt like a relic, now something that didn't belong, not just out of place in the house, but out of place in time, as if playing it again might allow something to hear through it. She no longer doubted the presence in the house. What disturbed her now wasn't the fear of its existence, but the shape of its intent. It had not hurt her. It had not screamed or slammed the doors. It did not behave like something angry or vengeful. It behaved like something curious. That afternoon, as the sun hung low in orange behind the tree line, Elaine noticed something strange. One of the decorative masks that hung in the hallway, an old wooden one from Bali, something her aunt had loved, had turned. She never touched it. It had always faced directly outward, as if watching guests come and go. But now it faced the wall, angled away like it refused to witness something. She gently turned it back. Hours later, it had turned again. She said nothing. By nightfall, she started to feel the air grow heavier, not colder, denser, as if something invisible was taking up space in the room, expanding to occupy corners it hadn't before. It didn't move with sound or motion, but with presence. Elaine found herself adjusting, constantly turning her body toward the corners, glancing over her shoulder, never fully certain what compelled her. Something had changed in the way the rooms felt. The kitchen seemed to pull her in now, as though the walls leaned slightly inward. The living room, once warm and familiar, now seemed too quiet, like it was trying not to be heard. Then came the mirrors. Elaine had 3 in the house. One in the bathroom, one on the bedroom dresser, one by the front door. That night, all 3 had fogged slightly. She hadn't used hot water. There was no steam in the house, no drafts or temperature drops, just fogged glass, and each one bore the faint imprint of a shape, like something had leaned forward, exhaled softly, and stared. No face, no fingerprints, only a subtle curve, the ghost of a presence that had no physical form. She ran her fingers across the mirror in the bedroom. It wiped clean to clean, not like condensation. It was oily, like residue left behind from breath, not entirely human. That's when the tapping began. It wasn't at the window. It came from inside the house. Small, subtle sounds, one then another, like fingertips against wood, not frantic, measured, exploratory. Tot tap, pause, dot tap, tap dot. Elaine followed the sound into the hallway, heart pounding like a slow war drum beneath her ribs. Her breath came in shallow gasps, yet the house remained still. She moved cautiously, expecting to find something misplaced, something broken. What she found instead was the open notebook from the other night, placed once again at the threshold of her room. A new page, a new word. Look, and below it, a simple charcoal outline of a face. But no eyes, no mouth, just a head, shaded thick with black around the edges, as if it were pressing forward from the dark. Elaine stepped back, choking on her breath. She didn't hear footsteps. She didn't feel movement. But she knew, beyond doubt, that she was no longer alone in the hallway. The light above flickered, the air thinned. She didn't have to turn around to know something was behind her. The unspoken warning Elaine didn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fling open the door and flee into the woods, barefoot if she had to. But fear had anchored her, not in paralysis, but in awareness. Some deep, primitive understanding told her, don't move too quickly. Don't show it, you're afraid. She could hear it, not breathing, not footsteps, but presence, the way a person knows when someone is standing behind them, just beyond their vision. The air warped gently around her, humming slightly in her ears, as if the silence had become sentient. And then it receded. The weight lifted. Not completely, but enough for her to move. She turned. Nothing there, of course. Nothing visible. But the hallway light was out. The bulbs had been new. She slowly backed into her room and closed the door, locking it, not that it would matter. She sat on the floor for a long time, heart still thrumming in her chest, listening. The tapping didn't return. The whispers stayed hidden, but her awareness had changed. There was a pattern to this. It was deliberate. The next day she noticed it again, the same notebook, now placed neatly on the nightstand. Another message. This time, not a word, just a symbol, a spiral, drawn tightly in the center of the page. Surrounding it were 6 small ticks, like a clock missing its hands. Beneath it, written faintly in the corner, a phrase in her own handwriting. You've seen it before. Elaine stared at the page, hand trembling slightly as she ran a finger over the text. She hadn't written it, but her handwriting matched, stroke for stroke. She went to her aunt's study, a room she had barely explored. It smelled of old paper and cedar, with bookshelves towering over a narrow writing desk. She opened drawers, scanned journals, anything that might explain what was happening. And then she found it, a letter, folded neatly inside an unlabeled envelope. It was addressed not to anyone, but to the next. The paper crackled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, her aunt's. If you're reading this, the house has begun to see you. You must understand, it does not think like us. It does not want. Innate is already inside. It learns, it waits, it listens, it responds when spoken to, but never ask it questions you don't want answered. Elaine's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced through the whispers, the symbols, the again, the look, the spiral. She remembered where she had seen it before, in a childhood drawing, crumpled in an old photo album, one she made during a summer visit to this cabin, barely 7 years old. She had drawn a woman with no eyes, standing in the hallway. A spiral was carved into the woman's chest. She had forgotten it, completely, but it hadn't forgotten her. That night, she didn't turn on the lights. Instead, she sat in the darkness, one candle flickering beside her, the notebook in her lap. She placed the pen gently on the page and whispered, "What do you want?" She didn't expect a response, but slowly, the pen lifted. It moved, unsteadily, like a marionette's arm tugged from above, and it wrote, "You." The candle blew out on its own. The moment of truth. Elaine didn't sleep that night. She didn't try. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, the notebook before her, the word, "You," still stark on the page. The pen lay beside it, like a fallen needle. The air in the house was calm still, but it was a deceptive calm, like the quiet that falls before the tide pulls back and reveals something buried beneath. She understood, now. The house had never been haunted in the traditional sense. It wasn't a place possessed. It was a place that responded, that learned, that remembered, and now it was asking for something in return. The morning passed in a dull blur. Light came and went. Birds sang faintly in the distance, but never near the cabin. No deer, no squirrels. Even the flies that buzzed against the screen doors earlier that week were gone. Elaine walked the room slowly, memorizing every shadow, every groove in the floorboards. The house felt smaller somehow, tighter, like the walls had shifted subtly, inward, curling around her. Then she found the room. It wasn't on any blueprint. She was sure of it. Her aunt had never mentioned it, and Elaine had walked the hallway dozens of times. But now, where there had only been a blank wall, beside the linen closet, there was a door, old, faded, with a bronze knob and no keyhole. She approached it with a slow, deliberate breath. Her hand hovered above the knob, unsure whether she was meant to open it or if doing so would mean crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Then, a whisper, not in her ear, not in her mind, from the other side of the door. "You already did." The knob turned, without resistance. The door swung open. Inside, the space was impossibly narrow, no wider than a closet, yet it extended back far beyond the depth of the house. The walls were bare wood, rotted in places, and the ceiling sloped downward like an inverted throat, and in the middle of the floor, the spiral, carved deep into the planks. The same spiral from the notebook, from the drawing, from her memory. It pulsed faintly. Elaine stepped forward, drawn not by fear, but by an overwhelming curiosity, a need to understand, to see. If the house was a question, this was the answer. As she crossed the threshold, the door creaked behind her but did not close. Inside, the air was thick, metallic, the kind of stillness found in deep water. Her skin prickled as she knelt before the spiral, fingertips hovering just above its surface. Something shifted. A sound, not a whisper now, but a voice, low, familiar, her own. "You are the answer to your own question." The spiral shimmered just once, and a sudden memory surged through her. Not a dream, a truth. She had been here before, long ago, as a child. One lost afternoon, when her aunt had been napping and the house had grown quiet. She had opened this same door, she had stood in this same space, and she had whispered something into the spiral. "Come find me." Elaine staggered back, her mind reeling. Her child voice echoed in her ears, small and innocent and inviting. She had called it, she had asked, and it had been looking for her ever since. The spiral darkened. The room dimmed, and in the shadows ahead, just beyond the spiral's edge, something began to unfold. Not with malice, not with rage, but with intent. Elaine now understood. This was not a haunting, it was a response. The choice was hers. Stay and understand, or flee and wonder forever. She stepped forward. The inevitability of darkness. The spiral throbbed like a quiet heartbeat beneath Elaine's feet. It wasn't light or sound, it was sensation, a low rhythmic pulse that traveled through the floorboards and into her legs, as though the house itself were breathing, or waiting. She stood at the edge of the spiral for what felt like hours, but time had become irrelevant here. There was no ticking clock, no shifting shadows, just the steady hum of something ancient and aware, and the stillness of her own decision. Her fear no longer screamed, it watched. She knelt and placed her palm against the carved groove. It was warm. For a moment, it felt like pressing her hand against a rib cage, and then it moved. The wood beneath her fingers shifted ever so slightly, the spiral writhing subtly like it was alive just below the surface, reacting to her touch. It wasn't aggressive. It was welcoming, in the way a still pond accepts a falling stone. A voice echoed again. Her voice thought this time, a whisper from within the walls. "You asked me to find you, so I did." Elaine's body stiffened. Her breath slowed, not from fear, but from recognition. The house, the presence, wasn't simply haunting her. It was fulfilling a pact. Some forgotten fragment of her childhood self had reached across that spiral, across the silence, and invited something in, and it had waited, patiently, without form, without face, until now, and now, it wanted to show her. The darkness beyond the spiral deepened, becoming tangible, thick, and ripe with unseen motion. Not malevolent, but final, as if entering it meant surrendering to an understanding she could never reverse. A silhouette took shape. It had no edges, no eyes, no mouth, just a vaguely human form, smoke woven into the shape of memory. It stood across from her, unmoving, but not still. Elaine stepped forward. It mirrored her. She raised her hand. So did it. Not threatening, reflecting, and she understood. It was her, not a ghost, not a spirit, but the shadow left behind by her invitation all those years ago. A version of herself that had grown in the dark, learning her voice, mimicking her thoughts, waiting for the moment they could meet again. "You're not here to hurt me," she said quietly. It tilted its head. "No," it whispered back, in her voice. "I'm here because you never stopped wondering." She reached out, and its fingers met hers. Cold but not dead. Solid but not flesh. A bridge between the known and the forgotten. For a moment, everything around her ceased to exist. The house, the woods, the hallway, gone. There was only the spiral and the realization that the barrier between herself and the darkness had never been about fear. It had been about invitation. She had asked the question, and now she was ready to hear the answer. Behind her, the door slowly closed. Not violently, not abruptly, just closed. Elaine didn't turn to stop it. She had crossed the line. The fear that stays. When Elaine stepped forward, the spiral swallowed her shadow. She didn't fall. She didn't vanish. She simply ceased from that room, from that house, from the part of the world that obeys the laws of light and sound. There was no scream. No final plea. Only silence. And then stillness. The room beyond the spiral faded back into its unnatural geometry. The door that had appeared vanished once more into blank wall. The grooves in the floor smoothed. The notebook returned to the nightstand, closed, clean, empty. Elaine's belongings remained untouched, but she was no longer in the cabin. Not really. Her body was eventually found curled in the bed, as though asleep, her expression neutral, peaceful. But those who saw her said there was something in her face that made them hesitate. Not fear. Something else, as if she knew something they'd in single quotes, as if she had seen behind the veil and decided to keep the secret. Her aunt's journals were never found. Her phone showed no activity. The last search history was blank, and the sketch of the spiral, the one from her childhood, remained tucked in the album, the ink slightly smudged, as though freshly drawn. No one could explain the locked room. The house was inspected from top to bottom. There was no hidden space, no false wall. The hallway stretched clean and narrow, as it always had. And yet, some visitors swore they felt a cold draft from the linen closet, a soft hum just beneath the surface, like breath held for too long. Over time, rumors grew. The cabin was labeled cursed in local whispers, but no tragedy had occurred there, only a disappearance. Still, the property was left to rot. Nature slowly crept in, vines cracking through the porch, leaves piling against the glass. But the feeling remained. Those who dared to enter briefly, foolishly spoke of unease, of mirrors that seemed too slow to reflect, of whispers when the wind was still, of a notebook that sat always on the nightstand, no matter how many times it was removed. And sometimes, just sometimes, the notebook would open itself, and on the first page, in the upper left corner, one word would appear in faint pencil. Again. No one stayed the night, but the house is still there, waiting, not haunted, not evil, just listening, listening for another voice to whisper back. And when it hears you, it remembers forever. Could you sleep after hearing this? What do you think really happened to Elaine, and what was waiting behind that door? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're brave enough to keep the lights off a little longer, dive into another tale before sleep takes you. There's always something listening. Your night isn't over yet.